let's kick things off with James Marshall, the man who started it all and got absolutely nothing for his trouble. Picture this. It's January 24th, 1848, and Marshall is working as a carpenter at Sutter's Mill in the Sierra Nevada foothills. He's just out doing his daily chores, la 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 la, picking up trash, fishing soggy wood chips out of the mill's tail race, when he spots something shiny glinting in the shallow water. Hey, look! There's something shiny glinting in that water! Now, Marshall wasn't some naive farm boy. He'd worked in mines back east and knew what gold looked like.
That's gold, Jerry.
But this was California, and nobody expected to find precious metals here. Still, he picked up those little nuggets, bit them to test their softness, and quickly realized he was holding genuine gold. And that gold is stronger than teeth. Marshall's discovery would trigger the greatest gold rush in human history. Within months, news spread across America and around the world. Ships packed with prospectors sailed around Cape Horn. Wagon trains crossed the dangerous overland trails. An estimated 300,000 people flooded into California between 1848 and 1855, all because of what Marshall found in that mill race. Marshall became instantly famous as the man who started it all. Newspapers from New York to London ran his story with dramatic headlines. Politicians gave speeches about him, artists painted portraits of the moment he found gold. You'd think this guy would be set for life, right? Well, not so much. Marshall never saw a dime from his world-changing discovery because he didn't own the land that belonged to his boss, John Sutter. California's mining laws were basically finders keepers, and Marshall had zero legal claim to anything. But it gets worse. While 300,000 prospectors got rich chasing gold, Marshall spent the rest of his life as a bitter drifter, bouncing from town to town, doing odd jobs, and desperately trying to convince anyone who'd listen that he mattered. Most people ignored him or treated him like a sideshow. Some bars gave him free drinks just to hear him ramble about finding gold for the 1,000th time. I found the gold! I'm the guy! The poor bastard died in 1885, broke and largely forgotten, surviving off tiny state pensions that California reluctantly provided. Think about that irony. James Marshall's discovery created more millionaires than any single event in American history, but the man himself never got rich from the gold. That's like inventing the internet and dying without Wi-Fi. What a ripoff! Well, wait, it gets so much worse. Meet John Sutter, the Swiss immigrant who owned the mill where Marshall found gold. Now, Sutter wasn't some small-time farmer. This guy had built an entire empire in California's Central Valley. He owned 48,000 acres of prime real estate, employed hundreds of workers, and had grand plans to become the agricultural king of California. When Marshall brought him those gold nuggets, Sutter actually tried to keep the discovery secret. Shh, now don't be telling nobody. He knew what would happen if word got out, and he was absolutely right to be terrified. Within months of the news breaking, Sutter's perfectly organized world collapsed into chaos. Imagine waking up one morning and finding 300,000 gold-crazed prospectors camping in your backyard, tearing down fences, digging holes, slaughtering your livestock, then telling you to deal with it because they had mineral rights. We got rights. You're not the boss of me. Even his own workers ditched him to go dig for gold. Crops rotted in the fields, squatters built shanty towns on his land, and the territorial government was completely useless. Sutter spent the next decade in court trying to get his property back, but California's legal system was a joke. Corrupt judges, disputed titles, and every idiot with a shovel claiming they had rights. By the time it was over, Sutter had lost everything. He died broke in Pennsylvania in 1880, spending his final years writing angry letters demanding compensation that never came. Here's the ultimate irony. The gold rush literally began on Sutter's property, but instead of making him America's richest man, it completely destroyed him. His golden ticket became his death sentence. George Hearst was the ultimate mining roller coaster, and proof that even success could kill you. This Missouri farm boy arrived in California broke in 1850. But unlike most prospectors frantically digging random holes, Hearst actually studied geology and learned to read rock formations like a treasure map. His big break came with the Ophir mine in Nevada. While other miners saw worthless rock, Hearst spotted geological gold and made his first massive fortune. But instead of retiring rich, he went all in, using every penny to buy claims across the West: gold in California, silver in Nevada, copper in Montana. By the 1870s, he owned pieces of dozens of operations and became a U.S. Senator. His son would build the largest media empire in the world. But here's where it gets terrifying. Hearst went completely broke at least 5 times. Mining disasters would literally explode his operations. Economic crashes would vaporize millions overnight. Bad investments would bankrupt entire companies. Any normal person would have been destroyed by even one financial apocalypse. But Hearst was basically a mining zombie. No matter how many times the industry murdered him, he'd crawl out of bankruptcy covered in debt and somehow strike it rich again. Even the most successful mining baron in American history was always one catastrophic decision away from total annihilation. The gold rush didn't just bring prospectors to California, it brought every kind of opportunist, criminal, and corrupt politician you can imagine. And few embody the lawless chaos of gold rush era San Francisco better than Ned McGowan. McGowan arrived in California as a lawyer and quickly worked his way up to become a judge during the wildest, most lawless period of the city's history. We're talking about a time when San Francisco had no real police force, when vigilante justice was common, and when the fastest gun or the biggest bribe usually determined legal outcomes. In this environment, McGowan thrived like a snake in a swamp. He accumulated wealth through questionable legal decisions, political influence through backroom deals, and had a reputation as one of the most corrupt officials in a city that was famous for corruption. When might made right and justice went to the highest bidder, McGowan was living his absolute best life. The man was involved in everything: rigged elections, fraudulent land deals, protection rackets for gambling houses and brothels. He had his fingers in every dirty pie that Gold Rush San Francisco had to offer. Even though McGowan had no legal authority in law enforcement, he led his own private militia. If things didn't go his way, he'd just go to war. Literally.
We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges.
But McGowan made a fatal mistake. He assumed the chaos would last forever. As San Francisco gradually accumulated actual wealth and respectability, the city's power brokers decided they needed law and order to protect their investments. The vigilante committees and corrupt judges who had thrived in the early days suddenly became liabilities. When the Committee of Vigilance cleaned house in 1856, McGowan went from powerful kingpin to public enemy overnight. His influence vanished, his wealth got seized, and his reputation went straight into the gutter. The guy who once ran half of San Francisco died as a complete nobody. McGowan was the ultimate example of a man who thought the Wild West Party would never end, until civilization showed up and kicked his ass to the curb. And now for the absolutely most bonkers story in our entire list. Joshua Norton's rise and fall is so bizarre that if I put it in a movie script, you tell me, no way this actually happened. Norton rolled into San Francisco in 1848 with his daddy's South African inheritance and immediately started making money the smart way. Not by digging holes like an idiot, but by buying up real estate and getting into the shipping game while everyone else was obsessed with shiny rocks. His biggest win? Cornering the rice market. While miners were starving in the mountains, Norton was getting rich feeding them. By 1853, he turned his modest inheritance into a massive fortune. The guy was absolutely killing it and living like a king. Then Norton got greedy and made the worst business decision in San Francisco history. In 1854, he noticed that rice prices were unusually high because of supply shortages. Norton figured he could corner the entire rice market by buying up massive shipments from China, then selling them at huge profits when demand peaked. He invested his entire fortune in what he thought would be the deal of the century. There was just one problem. While Norton's rice was sailing across the Pacific, several other ships loaded with rice arrived unexpectedly in San Francisco. The market was instantly flooded, prices crashed, and Norton was left with warehouses full of rice worth a fraction of what he paid for it. In a matter of weeks, Norton went from wealthy businessman to completely bankrupt. We're talking about total financial ruin. He lost his house, his business, his investments, everything. Worst of all, he lost his mind. So, Norton took his marbles, buried them 6 feet under, and planted a flag that said, "Emperor lives here." He had what can only be described as a complete mental breakdown, and decided that he was now Norton, the first emperor of the United States. No kidding. On September 17th, 1859, Norton walked into the offices of the San Francisco Bulletin and handed them a proclamation declaring himself emperor. The newspaper thought it was hilarious and decided to publish it. And so they did. Norton spent the next 26 years walking around San Francisco in an elaborate military uniform, complete with a sword and feathered hat. He issued imperial decrees about everything, from local politics to international relations. He demanded tribute from local businesses and held court on street corners. The absolutely most insane part, the entire city loved him for it. Restaurants gave him free meals, newspapers printed his ridiculous proclamations as entertainment, and when his uniform wore out, the San Francisco City Council voted to buy him a new one with tax money. Norton became one of the most beloved figures in San Francisco history. When he died in 1880, over 10,000 people attended his funeral. His imperial decrees are still displayed in museums, and there are statues of him around the city. Joshua Norton's financial collapse was so complete and so devastating that he literally invented an alternate reality to live in. And somehow, that alternate reality made him more famous and beloved than his actual business success ever did. Our final story takes us to 1896 and proves that sometimes the biggest fortunes come from being smarter than everyone else. Meet Thomas Walsh, born dirt poor in Ireland, immigrated as a kid, and became an assayer in Colorado. Basically, he told miners if their rocks were worth anything or if they'd been digging expensive gravel for months. For years, every miner brought Walsh their samples. He analyzed thousands of rock samples, building up an encyclopedia knowledge of exactly which claims contained what minerals. Walsh had the world's most valuable metal database. Here's where Walsh became a genius. In the 1890s, everyone was obsessed with silver mining. But when the silver market crashed in 1893, total panic hit. Miners abandoned their worthless claims faster than rats fleeing a sinking ship. But Walsh knew something they didn't. I know something you don't know. All those years of analyzing ore samples had taught him that these worthless silver mines were actually loaded with gold. The miners had been so focused on pulling silver out of the ground that they'd completely ignored the gold sitting right there in the same damn ore. So Walsh quietly started making the rounds, buying up these supposedly worthless mines for practically nothing. The miners were literally giving them away, thinking they were getting rid of useless property. Meanwhile, Walsh was secretly assembling one of the richest gold mining empires in American history, while everyone else thought he was crazy. The best part? He didn't even have to dig new holes. There were already massive piles of processed ore sitting around these abandoned mines, or that the previous owners had extracted the silver from, but left all the gold behind like idiots. Walsh literally just had to get his rocks off these existing piles and repossess them to pull out absolute fortunes in gold. The man was basically mining other people's garbage and turning it into millions. His Camp Bird mine alone produced over $5 million in gold, making him one of the wealthiest men in America basically overnight. Walsh had turned his insider knowledge into the ultimate perfectly legal get-rich-quick scheme. Walsh lived like a king. Massive mansions, epic parties, the full rich guy package. His daughter Evelyn even owned the cursed Hope Diamond because when you're mining empire rich, you collect legendary death rocks as hobbies. But here's where the curse kicked in. The Hope Diamond supposedly killed anyone who touched it, and Evelyn was about to find out why you don't mess with cursed jewelry. Her 9-year-old son died in a bike accident. Some say he had the diamond in his pocket. Her husband, who owned the Washington Post, went completely insane and died in an asylum. Then in 1946, Evelyn found her 25-year-old daughter dead from an overdose. She died a year later, completely broken. Walsh's brilliant scheme made him rich, but his wealth became his family's curse. The man who outsmarted an entire industry watched his fortune destroy everyone he loved. From 1846 to 1896, the same story kept repeating. Men struck it rich, then lost it all through greed and bad decisions. 6 men, 5 decades, one pattern. Fortune and ruin were roommates during the gold rush era. Even George Hearst nearly went broke multiple times. So there you have it. Will you learn from their mistakes? Probably not. That would just be silly. What's not silly is checking out this video about another historical disaster. Or really any of my content if you want. I'll see you over there.